The New York Mets have a clear opening left on their bench that could be filled through free agency. It also could just be left open for a competition in spring training. What should the Mets do with that last spot?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk about the Mets bench in the first segment. I want to go through where they're at right now with their bench and what they might need to add to it. In the second segment, we'll go through some free agent candidates that fit, others who don't, and what makes the most sense there. Then the final segment, I want to talk about vibes. Is there a vibes ad the Mets could target, whether that be bringing back a Starling Marte or Jose Iglesias? We'll go through that to close out the show. Before we get to any of it, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I'm covering the New York Mets on this show. This is the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. If you're a new customer, bet just $5. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. It's the last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Now, before we dive into the Mets bench, I just want to put a shout out at the front end of the podcast to Carlos Beltran, who is not only going in the Hall of Fame, but going in the Hall of Fame with a Mets cap on his plaque. Awesome news for Beltran and the Mets. I'm sure number 15 will get retired this year as well. Very similar to when Mike Piazza went into the Hall with the Mets cap, and then he got his number 31 retired. So that should be something exciting for the Mets to celebrate this year. And I keep on forgetting to mention Beltran on this show. At least I did when the Hall of Fame announcement first came out. So I wanted to make sure I addressed it on the front end of the show. Let's now talk, though, about the 2026 Mets. And as we look at where this team is at, the bench to me looks pretty good. So Tyrone Taylor is your fourth outfielder, and this is assuming that Carson Bench makes the team and is your starting left fielder. Taylor is the fourth outfielder. He's also your pinch runner. Luis Torrens is your backup catcher. Brett Baty is your utility guy, and Mark Vientos is your right-handed bat. Now, obviously, there's the DH spot, but if you look at the everyday players the Mets have, and the way that they're going to line up this team, I don't know how much plate appearances are even left up for grabs. Your everyday players, Bo Bichette at third, Francisco Lindor at short, Marcus Semien at second, Juan Soto in right. Your most day players, Jorge Polanco is probably going to be out there almost every day, but he might get the occasional blow. He is a guy with a little bit of a lengthier injury history. Same goes for Luis Robert. So having Bench slide into center field for a day with Brett Baty in left or Tyrone Taylor in left, that's one way to maybe preserve Luis Robert. For Polanco, you could start Vientos or Baty at first with the other at DH to get him off his feet for a day. You also can obviously just cycle Polanco through the DH spot. Again, I'd imagine that those guys still play most days, but they're not going to be every single day players the way I think Bichette, Lindor, Semien, and Soto probably will be. Carson Bench, I think he's going to get a lion's share of the playing time in left, but there's a tough lefty on the mound. Maybe that is where you decide to bench him. The problem is right now, the way your roster is currently constructed, that right-handed replacement is probably Tyrone Taylor. Maybe that's fine for the Mets. Maybe they're cool just leaning into the defense against left-handed pitching. If you look at the lineup that they're going to be able to put together against lefties, this was a significant improvement compared to last year, and that's even with losing Pete Alonso. You got Francisco Lindor, is obviously a switch hitter. Juan Soto, who hits everything. Bo Bichette. Luis Robert, I would almost bat him clean up against lefties. He's such an awesome lefty masher. You got Jorge Polanco, who at lefties great last year as well. You got Mark Vientos. You got Francisco Alvarez, Marcus Semien right there. That is 7 right-handed bats in your lineup against a lefty, with Juan Soto being the only true lefty. And then, yeah, maybe you start Carson Bench, or again, you could put Tyrone Taylor in left, improve your team defensively. and you roll with an almost entirely right-handed lineup against left-handed pitching. So could you use a right-handed outfielder to complement bench and left? Technically, but I also know that Carlos Mendoza is going to give Tyrone Taylor starts, and my guess is he's going to platoon Taylor and Bench in left, at least early in the season, before hopefully Bench just hits enough where they give him the everyday run. But I imagine we do see some of that. When it comes to the lineup versus right-handed pitching, very similar when it comes to the top, Lindor, Soto, Bichette. Maybe it's Polanco batting cleanup. Brett Baty would be in the lineup against righties every single time, I'd imagine. Now you can play Baty at first base with Polanco DHing on those days. You can DH Baty. You can also have Bo Bichette get a DH day with Baty at third. You could have Simeon, if you want to, get a DH day, or just ride the pine for that day, and you put Baty at second, Polanco at first, Vientos at DH on occasion. Obviously, Alvarez or Trent's behind the dish. Again, probably Simeon at second, but it could be Baty at times. You got Bench, and you got Luis Robert. So that would be your team versus right-handed pitching. When you think about the bench, it's hard to really see what this team needs other than a potential option to push Carson Bench in spring training, a guy that could become your starting left fielder on opening day. That's one potential option. You could try to get a utility speedster to replace the Luis Angel Acuna role. Or if you want and you're concerned about first base defense, you could get a strong defender to bring in so that you have a defensive replacement on the roster and somebody that can just help in that department with right now no true, real, natural first baseman that is on this roster. So what we're going to talk about next when it comes to those different archetypes the Mets could target. Again, utility speedster, maybe a strong defender at first base, maybe a corner outfielder. Is there a free agent that makes sense for the Mets? I'm going to go through some of their options here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It is the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you are right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone has been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and makes the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. It's the last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers by opening day. We're getting closer and closer. Really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, this week, the New York Mets were reportedly showing interest in Ty France, a free agent coming off a Gold Glove season at first base. It was Chris Cotillo of Mass Live who reported that. He said the Diamondbacks, the Mets, the Padres, and the Yankees were among the teams who have shown interest in Ty France. Since that report, the Diamondbacks have signed Carlos Santana, which would seemingly remove their need for a defensive-minded first baseman. So that would leave the Mets, the Padres, and the Yankees, who could potentially sign France. So we should obviously give this report at least some thought and some consideration. But the more I look at this guy's profile, I do not see the fit. I understand defensively. He's coming off a Gold Glove season. He was worth 9 defensive runs saved and 10 outs above average, split between the Twins and the Blue Jays last year. The thing is, in 2024, he was worth -7 defensive runs saved and -12 outs above average. In 2023, he was worth -7 defensive runs saved, -1 outs above average. I get he had a great defensive season last year, but I'm not even entirely convinced he is going to continue to be this elite defensive first baseman, and the guy hasn't hit in years. He had a 3-year run from 2020 through 2022 where he was a really good hitter and was still above average in 2023. The last 2 years, he has been below average, and last year he had 7 home runs in nearly 500 plate appearances. I mean, the power's gone. He slugged 360 last year, got on base at a 320 clip, Put that together, though, it's a 680 OPS, and he had 92 WRC plus, which is weighted runs created plus. Measuring hitters on a league average of 100, he was a below average hitter. He also doesn't mash against lefties. So I'm trying to find the role for Ty France, and defensive replacement. Sure. Okay. Late in games, you can go to Ty France. I think Brett Baty is going to figure out first base where you're going to have that option. And I'm not even, that concerned that Jorge Polanco is not going to figure it out over there. So I do get the notion of, okay, a good defender at first base, which you don't have on the roster. But and maybe that alone is worth it to the Mets if you're not really playing him that much. But Ty France is 31 years old. Why is he taking a role where he's not even guaranteed much playing time whatsoever? Not that he's going to find a bunch of playing time with the Yankees or the Padres either. I'm curious if there is a rebuilding team that would side Ty France and give him a chance to keep playing and actually getting at bats. It's a weird one. Would I hate it? Not necessarily. I would just hate it if he's taking playing time from Mark Vientos, because I'd rather bet on the upside of Vientos offensively with that spot getting time at first base than Ty France, where yes, he's a great defender, or at least he was last year. I'm just not entirely convinced that the guy's going to hit. So then it brings me to Paul Goldschmidt, who probably signs back with the Yankees at this point, right? I thought maybe he was going to go back to Arizona. Well, now they signed Carlos Santana. So the Yankees re-signing him makes sense. They have Ben Rice as their primary first baseman, but he bats left-handed. Not that you want Ben Rice in a strict platoon, but you also have to understand you have Giancarlo Stanton as your DH. So if Stanton gets hurt, or maybe I should say when Stanton gets hurt, Ben Rice can DH anyway, and you can have Paul Goldschmidt play against left-handed pitching. Because if there's one thing that Goldie still does, he absolutely rakes against lefties. Last year's numbers were absurd against left-handed pitching. He had a 981 OPS and a 169 WRC plus. That is a WRC plus nearly 70% better than your league average hitter. He batted 366. He got on base at a 411 clip. He slugged at a 570 clip. You look at the strikeout and the walk rates, it's comical how much better he's seeing left-handed pitching. He struck out 22% of the time against righties, 11.3% of the time against lefties. He walked 10% of the time against lefties, walked 5% of the time against righties. So it's clear that he should not see right-handed pitching anymore, but Goldschmidt is getting to a similar point in his career that we saw Albert Pujols at, a few years ago when he was on his way out, where at that stage, Albert Pujols wasn't much of a hitter against righties until the very end of his career, where he just was amazing against everything and was hitting home runs and chasing records, and that was all really cool. But against lefties, that was where Pujols really had value in his last few years. We see that with some of these guys who are Hall of Famers, and when it gets to the end, mashing left-handed pitching is what they do. So I see a more clear role for Paul Goldschmidt if he came to the Mets, in that he can crush left-handed pitching and be a defensive replacement and just a solid defender at first. The problem is it's more likely he's going to sign with the Yankees than the Mets. He's 38 years old as well. And if you do start him at first base against lefties, where are you putting Mark Vientos? You almost have to trade Vientos for a reliever to then sign a Ty France or a Paul Goldschmidt for those moves to make sense. And imagine you do that. Imagine you trade Mark Vientos. One of the trades I mocked a little while back was trading Vientos for Victor Vodnik of the Rockies, a guy that throws really hard, has a little bit of experience at the end of games now, and you have 4 years of control. The Rockies will get 4 years of Vientos. The Mets will get 4 years of Vodnik. Now, I think that the position player is more valuable in that trade, and I think the Rockies would probably get the better end of the deal, especially with Vientos hitting in that ballpark. But for the Mets, you get a reliever that you have team control of, that you could probably get more out of, especially getting him out of that ballpark. And you also clear a spot to be able to pursue a Goldschmidt or a Ty France or whatever it is. But then your team's getting weaker offensively. And what happens if Jorge Polanco gets hurt? What then? Now Baty's your everyday first baseman, or Goldschmidt's playing first every day, and you got Baty at DH and you have no other options, or I guess you're calling up Ronnie Mauricio. I just think that Mark Vientos has such a higher upside offensively than anything you're going to find in the free agent market at first base, that I feel like I'm just going to roll with the defense being uncertain. And I hope that those guys figure it out. And trust me, if they won't, it wouldn't be that hard to pick up a Ty France type in the middle of the season if your first base defense was just that atrocious. But honestly, I'm pretty confident that Polanco is going to be okay. And I'm even more confident that Brett Baty is going to be plus over there. So I think they're fine when it comes to first base defense. I would not be looking to sign a first baseman like France or Goldschmidt or anybody else for that regard. The other option, utility speedster, and there's really only one guy that somewhat fits that bill, and the Mets had some reported interest there, although that came out in a story recently about what they were thinking early in the offseason at second base. I'm talking about Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Now, the Mets, again, at one point were reportedly considering signing IKF to be their starting second baseman before they got Simeon. So now that you have Simeon, I don't know if you want IKF. He's never finished with a WRC plus even above 93 in his career. So it's a below average hitter, but a good base runner. I know he got a lot of flack for what happened in the World Series. You can ask 10 different people, get 10 different answers on if he made the right call with how far he stood off the base, if he should have been more aggressive, X, Y, and Z, who knows. But this is a heady baseball player that is a utility man that can play all over and will give you good defense. Would not be the worst addition whatsoever if the Mets picked up IKF, knowing that you wouldn't have to give him a ton of at-bats. And if you had an injury, if somebody went down, you'd have an option. You'd also have a guy that can play shortstop. And that is something right now that the Mets really lack. I mean, they have Bo Bichette that they can slide over to short. You could, in a pinch, still go back to Ronnie Mauricio at shortstop, although I think it's pretty clear he's better at third base. If you wanted to try Baty there, you could, but it's probably not going to look great for an extended run. That's the one thing about the trades the Mets made this offseason. They traded a lot of their middle infield depth. They traded Jet Williams and they traded Luis Angel Acuna. So there's a lot of pressure on Francisco Lindor to stay healthy. And it's funny, as I'm talking about this more, in my prep, I sort of glossed over IKF. And now I'm kind of talking myself into it. I think that actually might be the move. The more I'm kind of laying it out, because you can just stick him at the end of your bench. Wouldn't really matter. You don't have to play him much. He's been a player on good teams where he doesn't have to fill the biggest role of roles. I actually think that might not be a bad acquisition. Another guy that I thought I would kind of mention, even though I think he's way past his prime and he's a sneaky 36 years old, is John Birdie. For him, it's just a base dealing. So 11 bags last year and 14 attempts and limited playing time, but he had a 492 OPS. So I probably wouldn't go there either, but he does give you the ability to play him in the outfield and the infield, and he does steal bases. Last segment of the free agent market to discuss is corner outfielders. We're going to talk about Marte in the next segment. We're just going to be talking about vibes in the next segment. But you go through the list of corner outfielders. Jesse Winker, I don't even know if his back is okay to play baseball anymore with what happened last year. I hope he's good, but feels like he's a DH at this stage in his career. I could be wrong. Hopefully he signs somewhere and gets new life, but obviously last year was a rough one for him when it comes to the health. Michael Conforto is coming off an awful season, but I've joked about the idea of signing him to a minor league contract with an invite to spring training. I would love that. I'd love to just watch Michael Conforto play some games in Port St. Lucie this spring, but is there much hope that he's going to resurrect his career? Probably not. You got Mark Canha. You got Tommy Pham. It's all just ghost of Mets past. Alex Verdugo, MJ Melendez, Randall Grichuk, Max Kepler, Mike Tauchman. That is your list. Grichuk, I guess, would make some sense as he has been a lefty masher in the past. So you could make an argument about him potentially in left. I think I'd probably just prefer Marte compared to Grichuk, but again, we'll talk about it in the next segment. You got Mike Tauchman, who's the only corner outfielder of all those guys mentioned that's really coming off a good season, but he's going to be 35 years old, and he's left-handed. Do you need a left-handed bat in the corner outfield spot when you already have Benj? I don't know necessarily, but he is coming off a decent season. I want to close the show on vibes, though. I think there's 3 vibes guys to mention that aren't going to bring much to your team other than leadership off your bench, but maybe that is something that you should not overlook, and maybe you should just consider bringing in the guy that's going to be best for your clubhouse, and don't even worry about playing them too much. We're going to talk about some vibes bench guys to close out the show in just a minute. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level. Go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club. You're going to get Locked On Mets without the interruptions. You're going to get access to our Discord channel. You can chat with other Mets fans, and you get access to a merch shop. If you want to be part of the Everydayer Club, go to lockedonmets.supercast.com, or you can find the link in the episode description. All right, let's talk about vibes. There's a few guys that fit that description of a vibes guy that could help your team with veteran leadership. And the first one, oh my God, it's Jose Iglesias. No function in this roster whatsoever. None. I mean, outside of backup shortstop, that's about it. Defensive replacement, you're not going to sub Bo Bichette out at the end of the games. You're not going to sub out Lindor or Simeon. And quite frankly, both those guys are probably better defenders than Jose Iglesias anyway. Iglesias hit 229 last year with the 592 OPS. He was a net negative by WAR, minus 0.2, but he can sing, he can encourage, he has a great smile, he's a veteran leader, and he loves the New York Mets. Look, if this guy's looking for an invite to camp, bring him home. Probably not a guaranteed major league deal, but I also could see Jose Iglesias making the team just because he's the best guy to have around. So we'll see. I don't know if at this point a minor league deal is a slap in the face. Last year it would have been, but coming off the season he had, that might be all he gets. For him, though, that could be a career. He might not want to go down that road again. He might not want to try to grind his way through Syracuse to get back to the big leagues. I don't know. I don't know what Iglesias is thinking at this point. He's, 36 years old? So, again, this is not a signing you make for anything other than veteran leadership. But if you're trying to recapture that 2024 magic a little bit, that was the guy that was the straw that stirred the drink. Maybe you bring back Jose Iglesias. I'd say it's unlikely unless he's willing to take a minor league deal with the camp invite. And if he is, you probably couldn't find a better guy to give that offer to. The next guy fits the role of utility man, fits the role of vibes, also a postseason hero. We're talking about Kike Hernandez. Now, Kike has 4 years in a row now where he's been a below average regular season player. If you combine his WAR over the past 4 seasons, he's been a net negative, minus 0.4 over the last 4 years. Among hitters who have gotten 1,500 plate appearances over the last 4 seasons, he's been the 4th worst player in Major League Baseball in the regular season by WAR, or tied for the 3rd worst with Gavin Sheets. Actually, no. Gavin Sheets is at minus 0.8. So Kike was at minus 0.4. So my bad. Gavin Sheets has been slightly worse. But the worst player has been Brian De La Cruz, minus 1.4 F4. NJ Melendez, minus 1.1. Gavin Sheets, minus 0.8. And then you get to Kike. He's not a base stealer, 17 career bags. He's got a little bit of pop. He can get you 10 homers, depending on how much he plays. But he doesn't hit lefties better than righties, or at least that much better. I mean, I guess last year the numbers were, no, they were better. 93 WRC plus against lefties and WRC plus in the 50s against righties. Look, this guy hasn't hit in a while. He does give you the utility aspect, and he's good defensively in both the outfield and the infield. Actually graded out well at first base last year, too. So he would maybe check off that box of a guy that could play first for you. He could play second. He could play third. He could play left, right, and center. Last year, he did not play right field, interestingly enough. Did not play shortstop or catcher. Played every other position, including pitcher, where he actually pitched 5 1/3 innings last year for the Dodgers. Had an ERA over 15. So I guess he was the mop-up guy. And hey, maybe he could do that for the Mets. He's been unbelievable in the postseason throughout his career. 826 OPS. Last year, he had some big hits, but numbers actually weren't that great. 179 batting average in the World Series, a 458 OPS across the whole postseason, a 649 OPS. Now, in 2024, he had an 808 OPS in October. I still think he does bring that component where he's obviously not going to be phased by the moment in the playoffs, and he has risen to that moment time and time again. The fact that he can play all over is good. He also is a eccentric guy that would bring a different element to your clubhouse. He knows how to win. So I don't think I would entirely dismiss it. But if you're looking away from the vibes We're talking about a guy who's 34 years old, who hasn't been an above average hitter since 2021. And go beyond that, that was his only above average offensive season since 2018. He's just not a very good hitter. He does give you the utility aspect, but he does not give you much on the base pass. He struck out last year at an alarming rate compared to his career average. Career 20% K rate last year, 26.6%. I think Kike is probably over the hill a little bit, certainly offensively. But again, if you're talking about a utility guy for your bench, you could add him. I just think the IKF would be a much better add. He's not as sexy of a name as Kike Hernandez, but I think by function, he does a lot more for you. Last guy to talk about is, I don't know if I wouldn't want to say the most likely, but the one that might bring the most to the table for the Mets, and that's Starling Marte. Look, Marte's been good the last couple of years when you lowered the expectations. He's been an above average hitter. Last year, 270 average, 335 on base, 410 slug. So a 745 OPS, which is not that bad. 9 homers, which is pretty solid for him. A 112 WRC plus. We know throughout his career, he's been a lefty masher. Last year, actually a little bit better against righties than lefties. But I think if you were to sign Starling Marte back, and there would be no expectation of playing time, right? If you're signing Marte back and you're acknowledging to him that Mark Vientos is going to get a lion's share of the run at DH, you got Polanco, and Brett Baty and Carson Benj and Tyrone Taylor might all be ahead of him for at-bats in the outfield. And it pretty much is just, hey, Marte is on your bench to give you a professional at-bat if you need him. And that's sort of it. And he's a leader in the clubhouse that obviously has great relationships with the guys on your team, particularly your best player in Juan Soto. There's a case to be made that Starling Marte could be brought back and would bring more from that final bench spot than most, just because of some of the off the field stuff and just, the leadership that he could bring. But if you're trying to turn the page on last year's Mets, does Marte get absolved of that? Was he not part of the problem? Was he a part of the solution, but just not enough of a part of the solution? Like, I just don't know if the Mets, and particularly if David Stearns in that front office, sees the value in bringing Starling Marte back into that clubhouse or not. But again, based on function, makes sense. And if you also prepare him for the reality of potentially playing some left field, then I think, it would make even more sense. While he's not a great defender anymore at his age, he still has a cannon of an arm. And I think if he was playing sporadically in left, maybe he can get by. If he gets hurt, well, now he's hurt and still able to lead off the IL, sort of, if he travels with the team. So I don't know. He's an interesting one. I would not be opposed to it. I think from going through this exercise and talking out all of these options, guys on minor league deals that would be fun for me is Jose Iglesias and Michael Conforto. For major league deals, there's really only 2 free agents left that make some sense to me. It's Starling Marte and it's IKF. I actually think the IKF acquisition would make a ton of sense for the Mets. He would bring a lot to the team defensively. He would give you a true backup shortstop. And yes, you don't have much flexibility on your roster then. I think Brett Baty would be the only player on the roster that would have an option left as far as your projected opening day roster with the guys that are on the 40. But when guys got hurt, you still have Ronnie Mauricio, who could come up and fill in at third base, first base, second base. I imagine he'll play those 3 positions predominantly throughout the minor league season, and they might even still give him some time at short just in case. But you have Mauricio to be the guy that can step in if any of your starting infielders gets hurt or your DH gets hurt, being Mark Vientos / Jorge Polanco. That's one option you have on the roster that has an option. Well, that is one guy on your roster that has an option year. Too many options in that last sentence. Jared Young on the 40. He had good numbers. I don't think that we should dismiss Jared Young. If I had to say there's a leader in the clubhouse right now to grab that final bench spot, I think it is Jared Young. You can play him in the outfield. He's listed as an outfielder now. You can play him in left, play him at right, play him at third, play him at second. Numbers weren't great last year, but he had 47 plate appearances, and he still popped 4 homers in those 47 plate appearances, along with a double. Yeah, he batted 186, but again, such a small sample size. It's not a 722 OPS, which is not terrible. And he had good numbers if you look at what he did in the minor leagues last year in AAA across 79 games played in Syracuse. 75 games played in Syracuse. He hit 300 with a 396 on base and a 560 slug. You look at that OPS, pretty darn solid for Jared Young in AAA in a 956 OPS. And he walked a ton, didn't strike out much. I know the strikeout rate was alarming in the big leagues, but again, a super small sample size. Jared Young's an interesting bat, and he's 30 years old. I actually like Jared Young a lot, and I think he's the best fit probably to grab that final bench spot. I really do. Just because I want Ronnie Mauricio in AAA. I don't want Ronnie Mauricio in a bench role where he's not playing or where you're struggling to get playing time for him and Vientos. Stick Ronnie Mauricio in Syracuse. Let him play every day. That's going to build his value as a trade asset if he's dominating that level as he should. But also it's going to have him primed and ready to go. So the first time there's an injury, pop him right into that starting lineup and let him play every day in the big leagues. So Mauricio is obviously the best player that could grab that last bench spot, but I just think he's better suited to be in Syracuse. Nick Morabito is on the 40 because they had to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. He certainly can do some of the things that Tyrone Taylor is going to do on this roster. He could be your fourth outfielder. He can give you good defense in center. He's also a better base stealer than, probably Luis Robert. Not Luis Robert. I don't know why I went to Robert. Better base stealer than Tyrone Taylor, and a guy that you hope might have a little more upside offensively, but he has not played in AAA yet. So he should be in AAA to start the season. And the Mets did pick up Vidal Brujan, who gives you a utility option in camp, who's on the 40 for now, but I doubt that lasts. Non-roster invites: Christian Pache, potential center fielder with some speed, Christian Arroyo, and Greg Kessinger are sort of utility guys. Jackson Clough, I think he might be an outfielder, utility guy, but I'm not really going to expect too much there. He's a 29-year-old, utility guy, utility infielder. And then, Jose Rojas and Jose Ramos. So those are the guys competing in camp. I think it probably is just an open competition, and I think Jared Young's the favorite in that regard, but it could be someone like Pache if you want more speed to your bench or whatever it is. But if they are going to dip into free agency to add one more player, I think the two guys that made the most sense to me, it's IKF giving you that defense and a backup shortstop, or it's Starling Marte for his veteran leadership, for his friendship to Juan Soto, and for the fact that we saw last year, push comes to shove, he can still perform for you as a DH. Maybe not at an elite level, but an above average one. So if there was an injury where Polanco or Vientos goes down, the other one becomes your first baseman. Marte can DH. You can keep Brett Baty in the super utility role. You also potentially could stick him in left field a little bit as well. So those are the options to complete the Mets bench. I think the bench is in a great spot right now because I think they're primed to let Brett Baty and Mark Vientos play a ton. And I don't think you need much beyond that, especially knowing that Tyrone Taylor is going to find his playing time, giving you great defense in the outfield, but a bat that you don't like too much. I just think when you look at what's out there, there's just not a lot of impact that could be found in free agency. So you have to focus on specific traits that your team might be lacking. With IKF, the ability to play shortstop and bounce around the infield and be a strong base runner. Those are traits that can help this team. With Marte, his leadership and his veteran approach in the box also can help this team. So there you have it. That's my take on where the Mets bench is at on tomorrow's show, barring any news that we might discuss. I think I want to dive into some of the pitching the Mets had, particularly we did the show on who's the better bounce back candidate, Marcus Semien or Luis Robert. I want to do the exact same exercise, both Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea. So make sure you tune into that show. Thank you for tuning in today. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.